Good afternoon. My name is Jane Nakano. I'm a senior fellow with the Energy Security and Climate Change Program here at CSIS. It's my great privilege, really an honor, to welcome colleagues and friends from Ukraine here to join me and talk about the role of energy, and particularly renewable energy and efficiency as we think about the way that the future of energy system contributes to successful reconstruction, but then also the livelihood of its people and also economic activities during reconstruction and beyond. Now, obviously, energy is a lifeblood of economy, and I've been doing energy policy for close to 30 years, and it's something that really touches on everyone's livelihood. It's not just the household level, it's the industry. It really touches on infrastructure needs as well. But today, it's really I guess, not just the energy mix, but it's particularly the electricity mix that we want to focus on, because as the country builds out more renewable energy, there'll be both energy security and resiliency benefits that would come with it. And just a couple of the data points, right at the end of 2021, right before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine's power mix had a very strong role of nuclear energy, roughly 55%, led by coal, and renewables stood about 15%. I think roughly half of that was from wind and solar, and there was also hydro accounting for roughly half. But when you look at that figure in comparison to what was happening, let's say 15 years prior to that, the share grew quite remarkably, roughly 3% renewable share in the power mix back in 2009 to 7% at the end of 2021. And it's also important to note, for just a reminder to all of us in the room, in March 2023, the Ukrainian Energy Ministry announced 2035 goal of having roughly half of the power coming from renewables and the other half from nuclear. So there are all these goals and important steps that are being considered, and I am so happy that I'm joined by true experts and policymakers and thoughtful observers here today. And instead of introducing all of them at once and invite them to speak for roughly 4 to 5 minutes, let me introduce each of them because, and you certainly have their bio before you. They have very long, accomplished bio, but just quickly, to my left is Anna Zamazeva. She's the head of the State Agency on Energy Efficiency and Energy Savings of Ukraine. Her work aims at the cross-sectorial and also systematic implementation of the state policy on energy efficiency, alternative fuels, and decarbonization. She has over 20 years of experience in energy-related financial and also banking issues as well. And I am so pleased that she's here, not just to talk about energy, renewables, and efficiency, but perhaps really the context to which that energy is important to Ukraine's future. So first, please, if you can share with us some, 4 to 5 minutes of introductory remarks.
Thank you, Jane. Hello, everyone. Dear colleagues, it is a great honor to be here today and to represent Ukraine on so important conference for my country today. Every day, representatives of the USA, European Union countries discuss the principle Ukraine's recovery. It means that whole world believes in our close victory. And we should discuss what we should do during this time and how we prepare. About energy. Before the war, Ukraine actively pursued a policy of energy efficiency, developed the use of the renewable energy sources, and reduced CO2 emissions. We were successful in this process. But during the war, Ukraine has lost control over 30% of energy generating capacities. Our first task to restore all losses. And today I would like to provide you some information about investment potential in energy efficiency, renewable energy sources, and alternative energy sources for your private capital and financial institutions. The most energy-intensive sector of Ukraine's economy today, according to state statistics, are industry, the residential sector, and transportation. However, according to Ukraine's National Action Plan on Energy Efficiency until 2030, these sectors hold enormous energy-saving potential. In industry, energy resources consumption is approximately $10 billion per year. $10 billion per year. The potential for energy saving is over 30%. Investment potential is $22 billion. In transport, energy resources consumption is around $10 billion per year. The potential for energy saving is 10%. Investment potential is estimated $7 billion. In the residential sector, municipal plus residential energy resources consumption is approximately $3.9 billion per year. But the potential for energy saving is 60%. Investment potential is $20 billion. I would like to focus separately on the energy efficiency potential on the public sector. In Ukraine, there are over 77,000 public buildings, which consume approximately 5% of the country's final energy consumption. The state budget spent over $400 million per year on energy bills for central executive authorities. Between 20 and 50% of these expenses can be reduced through the activation of energy service companies mechanism. In other words, the implementation of ESCO projects in Ukraine in just central government buildings can save the budget a minimum for $100 million in the first year and up to $1.6 billion annually in the municipal level. However, there is a significant problem. Limited access of ESCO companies to credit resources and their high costs. I would like to draw attention to Ukraine's potential in developing renewable energy sources. According to the Institute of Renewable Energy of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, the total technical capacity potential of renewable energy sources in Ukraine is estimated at 874 gigawatts, including approximately 250 gigawatts of offshore wind power capacity. The potential for wind energy growth is from the existing 1.9 gigawatts to over 100 gigawatts. The potential for solar generation growth is from the existing 7.6 gigawatt to 71 gigawatts. It is worth noting that Ukraine has managed to install more onshore wind power stations with a capacity of 114 megawatts since the beginning of the war. This has allowed us to provide a sufficient amount of clean electricity for around 200,000 homes located just 60 miles from the front line in the southern part of the Mykolaiv region. This success demonstrates the potential of solar and wind energy in Ukraine and low risk. Currently, the National Action Plan of Energy Efficiency until 2030 has been developed with a commitment to increase the share of renewable energy in the country's gross final energy consumption to 27% by 2030, as established by the Energy Community Decision. And some words about other sector. To achieve this, the goals outlined in the National Action Plan, Ukraine needs investments of over 20 billion, including in electricity generation, $8.4 billion, in heating and biomass and production capacity, $11.5 billion, in bioethanol and biodiesel production facilities, $500 million. Furthermore, Ukraine has a strong agriculture sector, and tapping into the bioenergy potential will reduce import dependency, replace natural gas use, and strengthen the country's economy. The total potential for replacing gas with bioenergy is 37 billion cubic meters of gas per year, including energy crops, around 20 billion cubic meters, agriculture waste, around 9.3 billion cubic meters, biogas and biomass, and around 7.8 billion cubic meters. Ukraine has a national plan of energy efficiency, and we try to achieve our goals. I invite all partners, both governmental and non-governmental, commercial and non-commercial, as well as energy efficiency equipment manufacturer and financer, to join in Ukrainian journey towards recovery and green transition. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I include in my 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, it was perfect, and thank you for also mentioning about the fuel needs. Also, I think really highlighting how efficiency, in a way, is really the cheapest energy resource. The more you save, and they really, opens up that that money for to expand other energy needs or fuel access to different fuels and resources. To Anna's left is Andriy Konechenkov. He is the chairman of the board of the Ukrainian Wind Energy Association. He has over 3 decades of renewable energy and energy system expertise, and I'm so pleased that we can really learn from you how, especially wind is playing such an important role. And I was really impressed to hear that there has been wind capacity build out, even since the war. And it's quite remarkable. And so thank you in advance for your introductory remark. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, on behalf of the Ukrainian Wind Energy Association, which I have the honor to chair, I'd like to thank the Central Strategic and International Studies and their partners for opportunity to present today Ukraine's wind power and role for Ukraine, economic reconstruction and transformation. Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine has unveiled how reliance on fossil fuel made us vulnerable to energy crisis. The pathway to energy independence is based on renewables, homegrown energy sources. Wind instrumental to our energy security to tackling climate change. Wind energy brings democracy, independence, and peace. Ukraine has made significant progress in wind development in recent years. Even in wartime, new wind capacities have been added, bringing the total to 1.86 gigawatt as of the 1st of September 2023. Ukraine and foreign investors from United Kingdom, France, Norway, Germany, Sweden, and another country have already invested more than 3.5 billion euros in wind projects in Ukraine. Since January 2022, 183.6 megawatt of new wind capacity has been connected to the grid amid war. The main suppliers of wind turbines in Ukraine include international wind turbines manufacturers as General Electric, GE, Vestas, Nordex, and Ukrainian manufacturers Friendly Wind Technologies. Russia's aggression and temporary occupation of some territories of Ukraine deprived the country of a significant part of its green generation. The best solar and windy sites are located in the southern region of Ukraine, regions that have been occupied by Russian aggressors in the first days of the war. Because of safety reasons, wind companies had to shut down their wind farms located there. Thus, 71% of the total installed wind capacity has come offline. We have already 10 proven cases of wind turbines being damaged or destroyed. Nevertheless, despite wartime, the construction of wind farms is going on in Ukraine. Of course, I am talking about relatively safe regions of Ukraine. Thus, since the beginning of the war, 2 wind farms in Nikolaev and Odessa region have been commissioned, and 1 wind farms in Lviv region is now under construction. It is commissioned expected in quarter 4 this year. More than 10 gigawatt of man-installed power capacity are currently not available to Ukrainian energy system, either because of being damaged with Russia's missiles attacks, or because of their location in the temporary occupied territories. This 10 gigawatt could be replaced by wind generation. Experts of our association have developed Ukraine wind power development strategy by 2030, where we clearly demonstrate the possibility for Ukraine's wind power sector to deliver 18 gigawatt of wind capacity by the end of 2030, provided that the necessary regulatory changes are made. Ukraine has a pipeline of wind projects exceeding 6 gigawatt, implementation of which was put on hold after February 2022. So far, the main driving force for renewable energy development in Ukraine has been feed-in tariff or green tariff, as we call it in Ukraine. This summer, our parliament passed a long-awaited law aimed at green transformation of power sector of Ukraine. The law provides for comprehensive changes in the funding of the renewable market. The main fundamental change is transition from feed-in tariff to make-based conditions. Law introduced a new mechanism for stimulating the production of electricity from alternative energy source in Ukraine, the market premium mechanism or feed-in tariff premium. It also provides for guarantee origin, green auctions based on contract for difference, corporate PPA, net billing for private household. Ukraine has also a significant offshore wind resource. Anna talk about 250 gigawatt. It's potential, like to presentation in Institute for Renewable, National Academy of Science. And it's a technical offshore wind potential for both floating offshore wind farms in the water of the Black and the Azov Seas. Ministry of Energy of Ukraine, our association are currently cooperation with the World Bank and Danish Energy Agency on conducting scoping studies of offshore wind in Ukraine. It's also clear that the development of offshore wind farms in Ukraine will require the mining of our territorial waters. Ukraine post-war recovery period will open up new opportunities for investors, not only to develop new offshore and onshore wind projects, but to produce renewable hydrogen as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I very much look forward to your further thoughts on how these international partners, both some of the manufacturers, but then also investors, can be really part of the the Ukrainian wind sector future. To his right, next is Alexander Kravchenko. He's the partner at McKinsey and also the managing partner for Ukraine since 2008. His work includes co-leading projects that focus on strategy and large-scale transformations, as well as McKinsey's initiatives on the recovery of Ukraine. I'm so pleased that you're here to bring some of these more of a investor and sort of Western business perspectives on way forward for the renewables and energy future in Ukraine.
And thank you very much, Jane, for invitation. So when we think about like renewables, so and I think we covered well, so the element of local infrastructure development and also security of supply, but we do also believe that green energy can be a massive export opportunity for Ukraine, right? So during the whole morning session today, we have heard a lot about Ukraine becoming part of European Union as a North Star for the whole recovery thinking and planning. And but it will be not surprise to anyone in this room probably that with the whole green transition, Green Deal, Europe will be desperately like in need of green energy, be it power or hydrogen. And if you look actually on the map, there are not so many potential options for Europe to get this deficit covered of green energy. And again, like looking at facts, Ukraine is probably one of the now war aside, but Ukraine probably is one of the best potential locations to supply green energy to Europe. And there are several fundamental factors which I believe speak to Ukraine's strong position. So on one hand side, if you just look on the natural resources, and so onshore wind strengths probably would be one of the best in Europe. Also, if you look on the solar, so solar is not probably that ideal as if you compare it to southern Europe, but also like what we see that the profiles of wind and solar are very complementary, which basically allows you to achieve very, very good utilization of your renewables. So, and then if you also keep in mind availability of land, which is probably a big problem in Europe. So combination of wind, solar, and land, which allows you to build very competitive farms in Ukraine. So the second element is infrastructure. So it's both like very well developed infrastructure in Ukraine, which gives you like quite flexibility to build new generation capacities and optimize capex on these new generation capacities, but also interconnectivity between Ukraine and Europe. And we're talking about like power interconnectors, and now like with Ukraine being part of ENSOI, this allows you much more flexible and liquid market with the European Union on the like power side, but also like a little bit thinking strategically the whole the gas infrastructure of Ukraine and like connectivity of Ukraine with Central Europe via gas pipelines, and like like gas pipelines potentially being retrofitted for hydrogen exports, and that's what Europe is already trying to do with hydrogen backbone. It's another like element of this like infrastructure strengths of Ukraine in the context of Europe. And finally, like the third important element is like Ukraine has many adjacent sectors which actually can support development of very competitive hydrogen ecosystem. So we talk about like metallurgy sector, which is very competitive in Ukraine. Historically, Ukraine was like exporting high quality iron ore, ammonia export. So this can be also potential sectors which would consume local hydrogen and in such way optimize transportation of hydrogen to Europe. So, and like having this all like in mind, so we do believe that like fundamental and structural Ukraine is very competitive on green energy and like power or hydrogen. And when we run our models, so we see that like levelized cost of electricity is around $40 per megawatt hour, and like levelized cost of hydrogen is about $4 per kilogram, which is very appealing to many European off-takers. And that's also what we see now from McKinsey side, that like many European companies, they raise their interest about sourcing energy from Ukraine before the war, but they still want to maintain part of the discussion. So we believe that the structural fundamental advantage of Ukraine to export green energy to Europe. And I think we heard the numbers about potential, so it's also huge investment opportunity, of course, right? Because so it's like demand is big in Europe, there is very scalable like upside in Ukraine. So I think keeping in mind like this element, so green energy is really very strong recovery case. So it's structurally competitive, it is big to move the needle in terms of economic development in Ukraine, and it is like very synergetic to Europe. So it's like it can be part of the package of European Green Deal. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is like cost of capital. Like, and we're talking about like war-related risk. Also, like before the war, there were like certain elements about stability of political system, and then we talked about reforms before. But I think that's exactly the point of the recovery planning, and like the recovery plan, which should be developed jointly between private sector who could see this like structural advantage in Ukrainian energy system, but also from donors and Ukrainian state to reduce this cost of capital. And we're not talking about like cost of funding per se, but also reducing other risks. So we're talking about like war insurance, we're talking about like securing offtake via long-term agreements with potential European off-takers. We're talking about, of course, also improving like regulatory transparency. Now, this will be a long journey, and I think that's exactly the reason why to start thinking about it now, right? So like the whole like project development and project preparation and like all elements of de-risking, which we just like mentioned here, it will take like months or years. So I think it's exactly the right time to start thinking about it in the context of the broader Ukraine recovery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Next but not least, certainly, is Yanis Kopak. He has many very impressive titles and affiliations, but among others, he was former energy minister as well as finance minister of Slovenia, but also he was a former director of the Energy Community Secretariat, and I'm very grateful that he's bringing with them the perspective from outside, but really, very close friend and colleague of Ukraine, and his thoughts on the role of energy for Ukraine's reconstruction and the, economic activities beyond that phase. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jane. Accent is on everything former minister, former director, and so on. But I'm still, of course, I would say even emotionally deeply dedicated to Ukraine, where I spent quite a lot of my life. So being the last speaker, has a disadvantage because many things were already touched, but perhaps I will repeat something because I really structured my speech in 5 points: potentials, infrastructure, institutional environment, legislation, and money. I will go through them. And of course, in the beginning, thanks to CSIS and to invite me, and Michael Polski, who just left, for sponsoring this, and of course, pinpointing on me as well. Potentials. Ukraine is big. It's the biggest European country. And for renewables, you need a lot of space. So Ukraine is perfect place. This potentials, my colleagues here mentioned different gigawatts and so on. I would just like to say that there was quite a lot of confusion in the past. Even CSIS paper, which you can pick up upstairs, is based on old IRENA study, which says wind potential in Ukraine is maximum 24 gigawatts. Last year, European Commission published a serious study, much more serious, which took into account also land use constraints, and the PV potential for solar power plants is 416 gigawatts in Ukraine, and for wind 134 gigawatts. So these are big numbers, but just to compare them with something, because for majority of audience this is perhaps a little bit strange. Europe, currently the whole EU has 200 gigawatts of installed photovoltaics. So Ukraine alone has potential for more than 2 times bigger amount. And Europe is quite advanced in solar installations. And the second comparison, wind, the European Union with its ambitious 2030 target on towards decarbonization plans to install 130 gigawatts in next 7 years. Ukraine by itself has 134 gigawatts of potential onshore only, without offshore. So potential is big. Ukraine is also quite advanced in biogas, much more than many EU member states. Ukraine was the first in Soviet Union to install a big hydroelectric station, this one with Kakhovska Dam, which was destroyed recently. Okay, it's not the biggest one, but it was the first one. So potentials are big. Infrastructure, which was mentioned already, basically it's there. You know, it is anyhow over. I mean, the capacities are much bigger than the need, and this is why Ukraine survives all this shelling from Russians, because they can always switch from one line to another, because there are so many, you know, from old Soviet industrial era. So high voltage cables are there. One was even installed or constructed during the war, the Rzeszów-Chmelnytsky, so 400 kilovolt line, which allows 1 gigawatt of electricity trade, what is a lot, but it's never utilized, but it just allows that much. The problem is, of course, with distribution networks. In this paper, which all the participants got in advance, was said, look, there is smart meters are not there. It's true, but you know, in Ukraine there are so many smart meters as in Germany, almost zero. You know, Germany is also not very advanced with smart meters. There are countries in European Union, Slovenia has 90% of all meters smart, some have even 100, Spain for example, but some EU member states are not very advanced. So there is of course a need to, I would say, basically refresh the distribution network, but this will have to be done anyhow, you know, in this post-war reconstruction. This is trade. I mean, another piece of infrastructure is synchronization with European electricity grid. This happened last year in March, it allows daily trading, which is established now with all EU members plus Moldova. So there is established trade, and it's daily quite utilized with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. This is, I would say, an institutional infrastructure, and this is my third topic which I want to touch, institutional environment. Ukraine in energy sector is part of European Union already. It entered, or it became member of energy community in 2011, and the condition to be member is to align legal framework with the European one. Between 2011 and 2015, nothing happened. I mean, in Ukraine, they even didn't notice they are members of energy community. But after Maidan revolution, the reforms started. And now, I have to say, I mean, the first big push was that IMF requested from Ukraine to have EU-compliant gas market law, which was drafted and adopted in 4 months. You know, this for Ukraine is a world record, and it was a good one, and it still exists with some amendments, but it's there. Ukraine established National Regulatory Authority, NERC, which is okay. It should be positioned in the constitution, which was not amended yet. Hopefully it will be, but it's relatively independent. It has market operator, it has everything what needs to have. But it was building this, as I said, from 2015 on, now for 8 years, quite intensively, and despite war, and this is what I would like to especially stress. I think it's the most valuable thing which happened during the war. There were ideas to abolish the market, electricity market, to start to regulate everything again. And in Ukraine, some progressive forces succeeded to defend market setup and legislation and market functions. And that's really something on what Ukraine should be proud of. Ukraine is now a candidate to enter EU, so it's very careful about alignment with EU legal framework. What is missing, I think, and it should happen as well, it's a message to Ukrainian authorities. They should start align their legislation also with OECD and become members of OECD, not only of European Union. Nobody talks about OECD. OECD brings corporate governance, which is not part of acquis, European legal framework, and this is why it's important to become officially member of OECD. I won't say it's the same important as becoming member of EU or NATO, but quite important. Of course, there is a problem with rule of law, about which we heard today a lot, but it's getting really better and better. We can see this in practice. Not only membership in EU helped, but also conditions of IMF. Here I have to be very, I would say, rude. Different international stakeholders, EU, EBRD, World Bank, European Investment Bank, and so on, are conditioning something, giving financial assistance, and then if this and this reform will be done. The same is with IMF, but or United States or USA and so on. But the only serious message which is taken by Ukrainians is IMF. All the others, Ukrainian politicians learned the lesson. I mean, there are many conditions, but if you don't fulfill them, the money is still there. They find an excuse why it couldn't happen. I have seen, I will not name now, international financial institutions, which, not IMF, but others, which were conditioning something, and then they were even trying, when I was director of the Energy Community Secretariat, they were trying to silence us not to be vocal about non-compliance of something what was their condition, because they didn't want to not to give money. So IMF is serious, and whatever is among conditions for IMF engagement, it really functions. The fourth topic which I wanted to touch, I already did a little bit, it's legislation. So, which is quite well transposed from European into Ukrainian, but there are differences. In European Union, member states have directives which they have to transpose, and there are regulations which are relevant immediately when they are adopted. So just published in official gazette. In Ukraine, they have to transpose regulations as well. And regulations are 90% of European legal framework. Only 10% are directives. So in EU, 90% of the legal framework is, when it is adopted, is published and it enters into force. In Ukraine, you have to transpose everything. And on this way of transposition, many details are lost. And then it's this compliance, it's hard to follow. But what is additional problem of Ukraine and Moldova, but now we are talking about Ukraine, is this Soviet heritage. Every single detail has to be prescribed in the law. It's horrible. For example, just to give you an example, I mean, I like the most Irish legal framework. You know, their laws are short, I don't know, 15, 20 articles, and then everything is in secondary legislation. In Ukraine, for example, then in Slovenia, my country, European Union has approximately 200 legal acts in regulations and directives in environmental sector. We transposed all of them in one law, which is relatively long, but you know, there is plenty of secondary legislation based on this. In Ukraine, for example, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive or Energy Efficiency Directive, here is director of SAE today, for each article of the directive, you have a special law, you know, sometimes. So when we were transposing this gas market, or I mean, drafting this gas market law, which was condition of IMF, back in 2015, we had the biggest problems, not with lobbies, with Ministry of Energy, or I don't know with whom, but with Ministry of Justice, you know, because this was such a new way of drafting the law in Ukraine, they couldn't swallow it. And if it wouldn't be $17 billion as a condition behind it, it would never pass. But it would never pass because of Ministry of Justice, not because of political opposition. And this is a problem of Ukraine. It has to adapt its way of designing the legislation. And because particularly European acquis is complicated, it's a lot of it. And Europe already has a problem because it's over-regulated. And Europe now invented a new initiative which is called regulatory sandbox. You know, so the countries are allowed, European Union member states, to design a special regime which is being tested only in one region or in one city or in one sector. And rules there can be completely different than all the other in the rest of the territory. And Ukraine could perhaps, I mean, there are countries, mine, Slovenia, who have law on regulatory sandbox, which allows exemption. So something like this in Ukraine would be welcome as well, particularly for investors. And the last
Yanis,
yeah,
may I actually, can I come back to some of the questions you already highlighted? I'm sorry, I wanted to bring in a little more of a conversation.
Okay,
if
sorry.
You don't mind. No, it was very detailed and very rich, but I think we probably, let me try to put them in smaller pieces so we can digest it better. You know, we already talked about some of the energy security and resiliency benefits of renewables being part of the energy system. But what are the ways that we can go about integrating them? I think it's more about perhaps operational side. But some of you highlighted the role of the regulations. It's not just the domestic side, but the consideration is how to have something that could be better coordinated with EU. As Alexander mentioned, that the accession is and both, Yanis and Alexander mentioned how the, EU accession is a huge consideration, or the context in which these thinking should be proceeding. So I'd love to hear from all of you. Doesn't have to be, all comprehensive, but some of what you would emphasize as the way to integrate renewables in the Ukrainian energy system. But what are some of the top-level challenges and considerations that we in Washington should better appreciate? Or the U.S., or anywhere outside Ukraine.
You see, today our country, we need maybe support and aid in all spheres. legislation. Yes, we need your experience. We need your expert knowledges. If we talk about renewable, develop and research energy from renewable sources, and we talk about technical solution, yes, we need to. For example, if today we discussed that a lot of capacities and facilities, renewable energy sources located on territory what is occupied by Russian soldiers and by Russia, and we need restore, rebuild these facilities. Yes, and we should develop this direction, because it is very important for recovery and resilience of our energy system and our economy, and. Maybe my colleagues from private sector help in this. What do you think? What do you need to? Because if we discuss legislation, yes, we need to prepare for Europe to be like a European Union countries, because we want to be a big family in the future, and we should prepare our legislation, especially biomass. And now it is our first challenge in the nearest future, and we have a lot of barriers between our economic and our directions. For example, CBAM, and we need to prepare our platform, our basic law, and we should prepare our small and medium enterprises for this moving and transmission. Okay, please, maybe.
First of all, I'd like to support Anna, and it is necessary to remove as much as possible the legislation where the trade landscape can sometimes corrupt the immediate potential to wind and solar projects, including land allocation, environmental impact assessment, connection to the power grid, and construction. One of the main challenges of integrating renewable sources into the grid is that they are variable and in the manner to balance supply and demand. The grid operation is flexible and controllable resources such as storage, demand response, and backup generators. So far, we have only 2 energy storage projects, all 1 megawatt each, implemented in Ukraine. Over the last 2 years, Ukraine has adopted energy storage legislation. Now we need to implement the provisions of this legislation. Another best practice for integrating renewable energy sources into the grid is to enhance the grid connectivity both within and across regions. Grid connectivity can be improved by expanding and upgrading transmission and distribution infrastructure. I some repeat our colleague, only it's very important. By engaging consumers and communities in the renewable integration process, we can create a more inclusive and democratic grid that can reflect the needs and values of the society. For example, consumers and communities can be involved in distributed generation, smart metering, demand response, energy efficiency, and global energy planning. Successful synchronization of the Ukrainian energy with the EUE has created more favorable conditions for stable energy system operation with high wind and solar grid integration, for speeding up deployment of wind and solar engineers. Switching the Polish-Ukrainian pressure units in interconnector, but on commissioning other interconnectors and operating them in compliance with EU regulators will bring substantial benefits for both sides. For Ukraine, renewable energy sector, the possibility to export green electricity means increasing stability of power system, increasing renewable energy source electricity output, and reducing the competitiveness.
Thank you. By the way, I wanted to remind everyone in the audience that there will be another panel tomorrow that will focus on the grid and transmission, which is going to be moderated by my energy program colleague, Ben Cahill. But I'm actually glad that we're still looking at the grid issue because, I think renewables is a very important, source of distributed energy. And I do really appreciate how some of these technologies could be where Ukraine could perhaps leapfrog. Unfortunately, it's a time of distraction in some of the infrastructure. But as the country seeks to rebuild, and it's really an opportunity where a lot of sort of experiences and lessons in other markets, including the United States, could be better applied. And you don't really have to perhaps repeat some of the glitches in rolling out things like smart meters or demand response, perhaps communications between consumers, investors, and also operators, etc. But please, Alexander, if you have any thoughts to add, that would be great.
Yeah, no, I think actually. Sorry, yeah. So, just to illustrate this point of view, so we have a discussion with one of CEOs of European company, and they're desperately looking for the sources of hydrogen to be supplied to Central Europe. But fundamentally, we're absolutely with you that producing heat in Ukraine, it's probably one of the most cost competitive option for us, right? But if I bring this idea to the board, they will just look like you're crazy. You would not seriously consider investing in Ukraine. And I think that's where we really, if we have 2, 3, 4 successful cases of significant international investment in Ukraine, with all guardrails being potentially structured via this recovery planning program, I think it will change the sentiment. And it will change, okay, probably it's not that crazy idea, it is real. And I think that's why it's really important to focus, concessional funding also, to really have a joint discussion between donors and IMF and but also Ukrainian state to tackle all the regulatory issues, to think through about, okay, to pilot for insurance on the specific projects, but to demonstrate, prove the concept that it is viable, it can be done, and it's actually really structurally competitive. I think this will completely change the sentiment to the sector.
Can I quickly just ask you to help, I guess, I don't know if, it's more of an elaboration than clarification. So when you talk about hydrogen, would the primary idea be using renewable-based electricity and run the electrolyzers within Ukraine and ship the renewable-based hydrogen, or would you also be
I just use it as an example. Yeah. In this specific discussion, it was actually about producing hydrogen in Ukraine and supplying this hydrogen to Central Europe. Yeah. But again, there can be different scenarios. So,
a lot of opportunities. In other words, great. Yanis, please, if you could add some, thoughts. I mean, you already gave us a lot of rich sort of factors to consider, market functions, importance of it. But I'd love to get your, what are some of the sort of prescription you have in Ukraine to overcome some of the challenges that may be associated with integrating renewables in the system?
Renewables are integrated into the system, but the first thing important for this is price. So Ukraine went very unwisely into feed-in tariff, which was prescribed in the law, and it was impossible to change the law. This is what I talked before. Every single detail is in the law, and because it was in the law and it was set once too high, then everybody from the whole world came to Ukraine to invest. So numbers are impressive, but public debt is also impressive. this was not very sound. Electricity is too cheap in Ukraine. Okay, now it's a war, it's hard to talk about full market prices, but on a longer run, anyhow, Ukraine is integrated with Europe now physically, and price-wise, it will be sooner or later as well. So the price will increase. Increased prices will attract renewables anyhow, because they're the cheapest now. Even you cannot get bank financing for coal. I mean, even not for reconstructing the damaged coal power plants. Europe says no. I mean, for example, what I think is too much in this war environment. I mean, being too decarbonized oriented during the war, that's not really human. But okay, that's so renewables will be anyhow the only option for Ukraine, and they will come in a large scale. Integration is, problem is with infrastructure, with storages which do not exist, but they will exist. I mean, if the price will be the right one, there will be plenty of projects. So I don't see major problem. Building permits, everybody is complaining about them, but look at that study of how it is in European Union. I mean, there are really bad cases like France and so on. Ukraine is perfect in that respect. It's not that bad. So there are problems everywhere, not only in Ukraine. But I think that price is important. For renewables, they will happen almost automatically. Energy efficiency is a bigger problem. In energy efficiency, I will tell you one story again. Sorry, today from my former positions. When I was minister long ago for energy, I went to Sweden, to learn about energy efficiency, because Scandinavians are so advanced in energy efficiency. And then I remember I talked with somebody from the ministry, and he said only the price. Price has to increase, and people are so rational, they will start investing in energy efficiency measures. I said, for my Slovenes, this is not the recipe. You have to give them something, at least 10, 20% of investment, and then they will do it. It's different mindset. And we established Energy Efficiency Fund, which still exists, and it's functioning perfectly, and really brought in a renovation wave in the country. Ukraine also established Energy Efficiency Fund, which is nicely designed. I don't know how it functions at this moment, but when I was still active in Ukraine, everything was perfect on a paper, but there was one but. You already had to finish the investment into energy efficiency to be reimbursed. But people don't have money to invest and then be reimbursed. There was only one, and it was because I know the person, and he was not Ukrainian, he was from European Union, technical advisor, who insisted on this. He put it into the law, and then he destroyed the whole idea. So a little bit of, I would say, flexibility. This is why I mentioned regulatory sandbox is sometimes needed, to push through some great ideas which are then suddenly stranded on some very, I would say, on a first view, not very relevant barriers. And enough flexibility to correct this. I mean, and to fast, not to go to parliament where the procedure lasts forever, So this flexibility, Ukraine needs more. Otherwise, and prices and money from international community, from Russian central bank assets, for example, and there is enough of entrepreneurship in Ukraine to do it, but of course the gates have to be more opened.
No, thank you. Let me shift the gear a little bit and let's focus on the investment that is needed. We've already heard some of the numbers, how much is needed to really unlock some of the resource potentials and also to recover from the damages. But particularly when it comes to investor confidence side, I'd like to hear your views, any of your views, as to what are some of the policies, specific ones, that you think are particularly important to really gain the investor confidence and the money to be coming into Ukraine's energy sector, and certainly renewables, but then certainly efficiency side as well. There are all these appliances and perhaps installation. Any taker?
Okay.
Yeah, please, go.
I want to say to my colleagues that OECD opened office in Ukraine in this year on 1st March. You see, it is a very important question. We analyzed all problems and barriers what have private capital when they came to Ukrainian market, and it is very connection with my colleagues mentioned Fund of Energy Efficiency, what was created some years ago, because during 5 years they reconstructed only 110 multi-apartment buildings. It's not enough for our country, because I mentioned that we have 77,000 buildings only in public sector. And we need private capital, for example, for launch as energy service companies to our market. It's a good idea with a low risk. And we created in this year, on April 11, 2023, Fund for the Decarbonization and Energy Transmission of Ukraine. It is a state fund, and we could invite private capital to take participant in this story with a state fund co-finance. And the next financial tool, for example, we analyze all barriers and cooperate with the commercial bank. We create national decarbonization platform. In our country, it's not only, it is a fintech solution. First part of this story, it is a technical solution with the Green University, with the marketplace where we invite producers of energy efficiency equipment to be represented in our country, where any municipalities or small medium enterpriser could learn this solution and proposition and find finance for this equipment on this platform. And a second part, it is a financial story. It is a financial company with a license of National Bank of Ukraine. It is a leasing, factoring, loans and guarantee. And we provide finance through this platform for the small, medium enterprises, and financial institution could address to this fund, and through this fund communicate with the municipalities and small medium enterprises for implement their policy, because on this platform we collect and select feasibility study, the best feasibility study and bankable project for next financing, and we control and monitor and target use of money. It is very important. And what is the solution and energy efficiency measures will be the most effective. And I hope we could be like invest nurses for private investors in on our markets. I hope in the energy service in energy service sphere era.
First of all, I would like to note the Ukrainian wind companies have already a positive experience of cooperation with American companies. With 400 megawatt wind turbines installed in my country, a share of the American wind turbine manufacturer, GE in Ukraine wind market currently reach 21%. Unit capacity of these wind turbines ranges between 3.8 and 6 megawatt. In particular, the second stage Dnistrovskaya wind farm by Elementum Energy LLC in Odessa region, which I have already mentioned in the context of wind farms commissioned during the war, and which already supplying electricity to the grid, also consists of wind turbines manufactured by GE. The company also attracted funding from U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Another examples, first phase of Zaporizhzhia wind park by Eurocape Ukraine LLC, commissioned in 2021 in Zaporizhzhia region. By the way, this is director Eurocape in Ukraine in our section, Mikhail Chulkov. Maybe interested in discuss with him. And the famous American company INV Energy, Michael Polsky, which joined our association in May in this year, is currently exploring the possibilities of constructing 1 gigawatt wind capacities in Ukraine. So, as you can see, we already have successful story of fruitful cooperation between American investors and Ukrainian companies in the wind energy sector. We need to deepen this cooperation. At the same time, in order for American and foreign investors to have appropriate insurance guarantees for their investment, our state needs to make several important changes. The following steps, I believe, should be taken as priority. Establishing of a state insurance fund to provide financing for projects, I'm not talking about, it's very important. And second, removing currently restriction imposed by the National Bank of Ukraine of the purchase of foreign currency and cross-border currency payments. Today, currency restriction limit investors' interest in the both existing and new external financing. Such restrictions were introduced during martial law in Ukraine, and I hope that it will be lifted soon. Sorry.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. What are some of the criteria that need to be met for the law, the restrictions to be lifted? Sorry, I'm just not, well versed on that particular matter. I'm very curious to learn a little more about it. What are it's during the martial law, so it's when you say hopefully will be lifted soon. Are there certain specific sort of a bench? It's just a matter of time when the government deems it to be ready to be lifted. Or anyone, I don't, maybe, I don't, or maybe it's for some other time. No worries. Yeah, so Alexander, if you have,
No, honestly, I don't think that there are any critical legislature bottlenecks. So for sure there are things you can improve, and I fully agree with the colleagues. I don't think it's something what is really on the bottleneck. I think if I were to call out one critical measure which would potentially help the development of sector, I would probably think about scaling up project preparation facility funding. And again, my logic would be the following. So I don't really think that there will be final investment decision like during the war, but I think what we can do now, we can like catalyze a pipeline of project development, and then that's like to de-risk this. That's where you could potentially engage project preparation facility to co-invest together with companies with private sector to start preparing on these projects, and like again start thinking, okay, how to de-risk post FID implementation. So that probably from my perspective would be like the one, if I would call the most important like lever. That's what probably I would say.
To increase the investor confidence, yeah.
And to basically to reduce risk, like exposure for private sector, right?
Yeah. Thank you. And Yanis, please, if you have thoughts.
No, I have nothing additionally to add. I mean, to decreasing of risks through insurance, through this idea which Alexander launched just now. I mean, there were many ideas in the past. Having nannies, investors' nannies. Yeah, I remember this famous idea of President Zelensky before the war. But investors need to decrease their risks, and as I also agree, there will be no major foreign investments during the war. But when the war will be over, then things could happen very fast, and they have to be prepared.
And in many ways, I think that's what I think a lot of people want to see, that the outside world, the businesses and investors will be ready to step in right away and be partner of, Ukrainian people to help the reconstruction stage, as opposed to starting to figure out how to go about it. So I think right now, there's a lot of expertise and thinking to be done, and then we can be ready. And did you want to add anything?
I try to explain. I have only one good example. What is risk and low risk? If invite now private capital on our Ukrainian market, I recommend energy service company comes to us. Why? Because we have one successful story for private investor in Kherson region. This region was occupied during not 1 year, 9 months. 9 months. Totally Kherson region, now only one part, left side. And before the war, in this region was finished two hospital where was provide this energy service measures. And company have agreement 15 years. They put a big money. Near 20 million hryvnias. In hryvnias, it was $1 million. And after started the war, and territory was occupied. But during this period, when these hospitals and this region was occupied, all this time government pay for this contract all this time, and this private company return their money, and I hope it is the most no risk sphere, and I invite private capital to Ukraine for energy service measures and companies to us. Thank you.
No, that was an excellent example. Thank you so much, Anna. Now, let me invite all of you in the audience to, well, now you don't have to, but if there are any questions, I invite you to ask all or any of the panelists. This is a chance for you to get, figure out any of the questions you might have. I guess as a ground rule, if you could please identify yourself, name, affiliation, and I guess question in the form of question as opposed to sort of a long commentary. Thank you. Yes, please. Oh, yep. Sorry, any hands? Oh, yeah, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting presentations and discussion. My name is Alexei. I'm a senior principal on the RMI Climate Aligned Industry Program, leading hydrogen initiatives. So my question will be about vision and integrated resource planning, and we've heard about it a lot this morning. And you know, if I listen to the discussion at the panel, to be honest, I struggle a little bit to reconcile all the different bits and pieces here, right? Because we've talked about power system design, and there was a question about, hey, you know, well, first of all, there was there is a lot of potential there, and then, you know, the intention to have 50% renewables-based power system by 2035, and then the realization that, yes, we need, you know, to balance, and we need storage, and etc. I think it's very difficult to design the power system if you don't know, you know, how, you know, the rest of the economy would look like, right? Because power and energy by design, this is a life force of economy, right? If finance is the blood of economy, this is life force of economy, right? So, and probably the question will be to you, Alexander, because you've done some really good job and good work on steel sector, right? And you know, that study recently thinking about how steel sector could be reconstructed, role of hydrogen, HBI, etc. You've talked about export of hydrogen. Again, you know, yes, that may all happen, and maybe that's a, you know, that's the direction of travel. But then there will be the reconstruction needs, and you know, lots of internal demand for steel, concrete, you know, developing manufacturing. All of that will require power, right? So my question is, who is really doing that integrated thinking about how that system should look like based on the integrated resource planning and economy as a whole? And you know, Lugano plan is probably not the one that answers that question, because in my view, that's just a catalog of asks that adds up to a big amount of money in the end. But so is there anyone who is developing that, or does such plan already exist? I mean, if you could comment, that would be much appreciated.
So probably let me try. So I think for sure, like, I think Minister of Energy, they are developing like some energy strategy and energy vision. I think we should also be very realistic. It's very difficult to like forecast any energy system like well thought through and balanced with all uncertainties we're living in, right? And that's why I would separate still two things. One is, okay, how like the overall like energy system will be balanced, which is super difficult task, I guess. But the second, okay, like are there any opportunities for private sector to invest now? And then how you hedge these risks. You basically try to be as exposed to export as possible. Yeah, direct or indirect exports. And I think that like that's why I do believe that it will be very difficult like to attract private capital in purely local market investment and revenue stream, just because it's such unclear situation. But it's much easier to think through about the project which would be hedged to export market. Now, and to your question, yes, some planning is done. Again, part of the Lugano, even of Lugano paper, there was like some actually quite well thought through energy system balance, but it's all very fragile, obviously.
I think it is a very interesting question, because you understand very clear that it's a little bit separately. Economy, energy, and private capital in our country. But I hope it will be our next step when we will change a little bit, because now it is a multi-sectoral, but we have energy strategy, but we don't have plan how to control and monitoring to implementation of this step and achieve these goals. But I hope during next year we cooperate between Ministry of Economy and Ministry of Energy and with the private sector, because government and we don't do business. They should do and develop this sector, renewable energy, alternative energy sources and other. Thank you.
Would add, so I agree with Alexander, it's impossible to be very precise in strategic planning. I mean, we don't know when Mariupol will be regained, if Akhmetov will invest into Azovstal or not. And
What happens to Zaporozhye's powers? Like
yeah.
nuclear powers?
We don't know. So you cannot have a strategy now. But on the other, so it's currently it's a war in Ukraine, but also EU is sometimes not very clear. For example, hydrogen. You mentioned hydrogen, big potential, and so on. So there are three possible ways to transport green hydrogen from Ukraine: via ammonia, then via gas pipelines, and via tankers or whatever, I mean trucks or I don't know.
Indirect exports.
Pardon?
Indirect exports.
Yeah, but and Europe, I mean the I would say market in Europe didn't show the way yet, you know, and there are coming people to Ukraine, or it was before the war, I know for those events, coming with different ideas, you know. Well, they are expecting that Ukraine will invest into hydrogen-ready gas pipelines. How it will invest, I mean, they don't have money to survive, you know, come on to upgrade gas pipelines for Europeans, I mean for EU. Then this idea of transporting ammonia, you know, Naftogaz already signed a letter or MOU with RWE to transport ammonia from Odessa via Gibraltar to Hamburg, and you know, and then it was development of this idea, and so on. So different ideas are coming to Ukraine, poor Ukraine, which is struggling with survival, you know, and big expectations what there will be. Let's see. I mean, we cannot really have a clear strategic plan, but in general, I'm optimistic. Potentials are there, and just that this war will be over, I think many things will pop up quite fast.
Sorry, in conclusion about green hydrogen, first of all, we'd like to understand who is producer electricity for hydrogen. Yeah, and for nuclear, it's impossible because never Europe buy this hydrogen. It's political. First of all, we'd like to develop manufacturers, logistic, and more questions before understanding how much produce green hydrogen. And future, we will discuss about how transportation, ammonium or green hydrogen used in local. And first of all, we'd like to start development renewable energy, more electricity, and energy storage. And next, discuss about green hydrogen.
Any other questions? Oh, please.
I don't want to be the one preventing everybody from going to, you know, the after party. So real quick, Lyubimir Gerasimenko, I'm a partner in Velocity. Velocity is an advisory group that supports energy development through de-risking projects, or rather trying to help developers de-risk projects throughout the life cycle. Quick question on the state of affairs in renewables in Ukraine. So we all know the horror story that evolved since about 2020, right? The green tariff, the debt of the guaranteed purchaser, and so on and so forth. Now we have a situation in the market, it seems, when a number of players have already voluntarily abandoned the guaranteed green tariff and started selling electricity in, I don't know if this is the day forward market. Most probably it's the balancing market, right? Because it's the only way to earn at least some kind of money for what they're producing. Now, do you think this is something which will be prevalent as months and years roll on? Is this something of a fate that will befall all the developers of existing green capacities in Ukraine? Because personally, I do not see how that situation can be resolved with this massive debt of guaranteed buyer currently outstanding and no improvement in sight. Please, I mean, choose. Anyone can answer.
Very shortly. First of all, it's a real problem with feed-in tariff, and guarantee buyer pay now around 40% from feed-in tariff. And now we have in hryvnia approximately 25 billion hryvnias not paid to for producers. Now in 1st October, we have some companies produce first of all not only sun and from wind, like to sign the agreement together with a green trader. It's not green trader, this is only symbolic name. And more better because they received approximately, maybe not in 8.8 euro cent per kilowatt hour, maybe 7, only stability and flexible agreement. It's a future our energy, because now Energoatom price for sale for 1 kilowatt hour approximately from 5 till 10 euro cent per kilowatt hour. Nuclear now, it's more expensive. And second questions about nuclear depend from Russian fuel, the Russian nuclear fuel. It's now, I don't understand how we can buy via Czech Republic and maybe another country. This is more expensive, and we'd like to stop nuclear. Impossible stop, because it's a big question. Now renewable reduced price, and we think about future only via trader, only directly contract by consumer. Another system, I don't know.
So you think that wind and solar will voluntarily surrender the green tariff and will just continue working in the open market?
For a new project.
No, for the existing one.
Only for big power plant. For example, for wind 60 or 100 megawatt, it's real help change situation, because I don't know how wait money from guarantee buyer come back for electricity generation. And I think for small project, this is depend situation from when feed-in tariff it's a very expensive for solar, and I think this is project safety depend from guarantee buyer. And from 2020, it's reduced feed-in tariff. For this project, more change situation, and will sell via green traders. Maybe Mr. Kopach correct me.
I'm not very familiar with currently ongoing activities and relations, but I recently was dealing with a subsidy scheme and similar problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and 95% of all investors just left the subsidy scheme and went on a market, and they're perfectly happy because of prices, because prices went up. Yeah, perhaps this is a solution. I mean, because feed-in tariffs, if we are fair, I mean, they were really too high. The profits were simply too big. And of course, political resistance to push this through in the pre-war time was big. Now it's war. We can understand also the liquidity problems of guaranteed buyer. I don't know how this will be solved on the end, but in a few years from now, I'm sure that market will do what needs to be done.
Yes, please. Let me. What's that? Oh, there was another. Oh, I'm sorry. You were. Oh, sorry. Yes. Did you have a hand up? Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes. Let's go.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob Sweeney, NX Solutions. We're a developer and investor, and looking to Ukraine for a number of different projects, and was there not too long ago. So I can see what you're all living with right now. So that said, couple observations. The U.S. government's been very helpful with Westinghouse and some others to bring nuclear fuel to Ukraine to replace Russian sources. The second thing is that when you look at markets, and especially in the renewable space, take a look at the United States and how we didn't, and how we did do it right. In some states, we did it really well. Other states and other regions, we haven't. We have market problems. So do look into the U.S. as a potential lessons learned and space to maybe look forward to reshape your markets, and also the opportunities that U.S. companies bring to Ukraine. One question specifically to Alexandra, and maybe you do or don't have the answer, but I know McKinsey was working with J.P. Morgan and BlackRock on the big fund. Do you have any insights on that? Any color you want to share on where that is, where it's going, and what it might mean to this crowd in the energy space? Thanks.
So we were actually not like part of this consortium, so we do coordinate on some projects. So again, what I know from, I think, like BlackRock, they are still like working on to set up this fund. I think like fundraising is planned this year or early next year. It's still a little bit like way out, but for sure this is one of the vehicles to reduce risk for private sector, and I think energy potential, of course, would be part of the priority sectors.
I think it's quite challenging, as some of the questions, but in some of your comments highlighted. When there's war going on, it is really hard to share with outside world some of the detailed, targets, some of the steps, because it's really a lot of things are moving target. There's so many variables, right? But I cannot thank all of you enough to really share with us really the direction. The details may have to be revised along the way, with a lot of, internal consultations, perhaps engagement with the external stakeholders. But I think the direction is quite clear. I think Ukrainian, both public and private sector energy stakeholders are really thinking about how to structure energy system that could really provide for the energy security, but also, infrastructure resilience, and also, more of an economic sense, economic competitiveness as well. Again, let me just, Anna Zamazieva, Andriy Konichenko, Alexander Kravchenko, and of course, Yanis Kopak. I am just so grateful that you were able to travel and join us in person. And please join me in thanking them. And then also feel free to stay around and enjoy the chance to really get to know any of these experts, and then share your thoughts. Also give them some sense as to what more we could be doing together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.